Hey guys, Rag and Dragon here, and I'm here today to review this book, Behave by Robert Sapolsky. He is a neuroscience and biology professor at Stanford, and he has written this massive 800-page book on human behavior. Now, this book, I would really recommend it. It is a true masterpiece because, well, let's start at beginning at the topic behave. When you think about the topic of human behavior, it's so broad. I mean, just think about all the different fields that fall under human behavior. You have anthropology, sociology, economics, psychology, political science, communications, marketing, business. Um, if you think about all the areas that fall under human behavior, it's just there's so much, and all these fields have their subfields and their subspecialties, and people spend their lives studying this one little thing. And just like as myself, as I go and read about an article in the Atlantic or something that I find interesting, I'll maybe one minute it's game theory, and what's the best solution to the prisoner's dilemma? How can we get two people to cooperate if there's no rational incentive for them to do so? Or the next is maybe I'll be thinking about emotion and reason, or genes and evolution, or sexual selection, or any number of things. And the problem is that I don't really know where all of these things fit together. And that's what Sapolsky sets out to do in this monumental book, Behave. He tries to create an overview of all of these different areas and fit them into a sort of logical schema. And his advantage is that he's very well read in the academic literature. So whenever he touches on one of these topics, he can synthesize the sum of what would be a lot of different academic articles and journals. And if you're not an academic and you haven't been reading this stuff for a long time, then you probably don't know where to begin. So you can read 50 different articles and begin to have an idea of where a particular field is thinking about a particular issue. In this book, Professor Sapolsky summarizes many of these in a few pages or even a few paragraphs. And the organization of the book is okay, let's think about a hypothetical human behavior. So let's say yeah, someone is moving their hand like I am now, or they're pulling a trigger. And let's think about what was happening at that second. And then, and what are the factors that caused that movement to happen in that second? And then before that second, then what was happening in the previous few seconds or minute? What sensory experiences was that person having that caused them to do the behavior? And then before those few minutes, what was happening in the last few hours that caused that behavior? What were their hormones that were influencing how they were tending to basically their proclivities. What hormones were influencing their proclivities? How does their diet and what happened earlier in the day influence what they decide to do now? And then going back in time to their environment and what happened in the few months before, and their childhood, and what challenges they face growing up, and then what challenges they face in the womb. Did they get all their nutrients? And then going back into human history, and then prehistory, and then evolution, and then so on. And so in each one of these temporal areas tackles a different topic. So for example, most recently, most proximate to any behavior is your neurons are firing and telling your body to do something. So there's a very nice explanation here about okay, how do neurons work? They work by transmitting positive ion potentials, a positive charge, um, from one area of brain to the other, from one neuron to the other. And how does that work? Well, the charge jumps across synapses, which are the little gaps between the axons and dendrites. And then once it reaches a certain threshold, a little gateway at the middle of the neuron called the hillock opens up and pushes the charge through off to the next neuron. And how does this work? And so on and so on. And then he discusses brain imaging studies, and a common theme throughout the book is different parts of the brain being associated with different emotions. So, for example, the amygdala associated with fear and aggression, and the anterior cingulate cortex is associated with pain. And there's other parts of the brain that are associated with theory of mind, which is, my ability to think about, what you may be thinking or knowing, or maybe, you know, a piece of candy is in a certain box, but I have to sort of know that if you weren't in the room when the candy was placed in the box, then you don't know where that candy is, right? So that's a basic conceptual concept and that is associated with part of the brain, and the prefrontal cortex, which is the last part of the brain that is developed. You don't often see it fully developed until people are in their mid-20s. So teenagers actually experience emotions more powerfully because they're not mediated by the prefrontal cortex. And of course, he discusses hormones, testosterone. It's not necessarily just associated with aggression. It actually is associated with status maintaining behavior. So that could require aggression, but maybe not. If society's norms say that to maintain your status you have to be generous, then testosterone can increase generosity. Oxytocin is associated with pro-social behavior, but only in a certain context. It's only within in-groups and not necessarily with out-groups. So it can actually cause xenophobia. Um, and then he goes through genetics, and as far as genetics, he emphasizes that it's not necessarily your genes that always express themselves. It's also the transcription factor. Does it activate the gene so that it expresses itself, or does the gene remain dormant and unused? Um, and the same transcription factor can activate different genes. Certain genes can be activated by multiple transcription factors, and so on and so on. So the overall theme of this book is that behavior is not any one thing. It doesn't have one determinant. What it is a sequence of different factors all interacting with one another, and each one of those factors only changes how you will tend to respond to another factor. So they're all interaction variables, and no single variable is determinative. So I can't really summarize this book adequately at all. You really have to read it. I would highly recommend it. For anyone who is interested in human behavior, this is a very good base to start from, a very good survey of the current academic um, literature that is out there about human behavior. So, yeah, go read Behave.